bill has a really simple proposition. The government is putting forward the basic idea that if you're sick, you shouldn't be able to get medical treatment. That's what this government is saying. To all of the people who Australia has locked up in prisons or on prison islands because they've committed no crime but have done nothing more than come here and try and seek our help, often fleeing war and trauma and persecution. They've come here and the Australian government, under successive governments, under a bipartisan policy, has made them sick. They've made them sick. Because when you lock people up in indefinite detention when they've committed no crime, when you say to young children, even though you have done nothing wrong, you are going to spend your future unable to live freely and play like every other child does, when you do that to people, it makes them sick. It makes them sick. And we've been told that time and time again, under Liberal government, under Labor government, that this policy of offshore, indefinite, mandatory detention breaks people. It breaks them to the point where children have tried to set themselves, or have tried to kill themselves, where we've had reports of people trying to set themselves on fire. That is what we have done to people. Now, the health crisis, the people who are getting help under this legislation are people who need it. They are sick people, and 8 out of 10 times the minister agrees they're sick. And so they get the help they need without having to go to court. That is the law now, and this government wants to change it. This government wants to go back to the old way of doing things, where even if the minister agrees that you're sick, you have to go to court. You have to go to court, and the minister and the government will fight you with all the vast resources of the Australian government. And they will fight you and fight you and fight you. And if you get sick and if you die along the way, well, so be it, we don't care. This system is working. It is getting help to the people who need it. They are getting the treatment that they need, and this government wants to deny that to them. And we now have a question. We now have a question to answer in Australia. Regardless of where you stand on whether you think offshore detention is right, whether you think it's right to keep people locked up for not having committed any crime, we now have to deal with the fact, the very obvious fact, that under this government's watch there are now hundreds of people who are sick because the government has made them sick. And what are we going to do with those people? What are we going to do with those people? Are we going to say they are not entitled to medical help, which is what this government wants to do, or are we going to allow this legislation to stay in place so that they can just get the help that they need? Now, obviously the government doesn't care whether sick people get worse or die. It's quite happy to leave them in conditions where they don't get the medical care they need, and in fact leave them in conditions that are going to make them sicker. It's quite obvious the government doesn't care. But I hope that when if this bill passes this place, unless the government has a change of heart, for which you need a heart in the first place, but unless that happens, if this bill passes here and goes to the Senate, then I say to all of the other members of the Senate, by rejecting this bill, you are not posing a security risk to Australia. By knocking this bill back, you are not changing the government's border protection policies. I'd love it if the medevac bill changed the government's border protection policies, but it doesn't. You can, if you want to, it's not my preference, but if you want to, if you believe in offshore detention, if you believe in indefinite detention, you believe in all of those things, you can still knock this bill back. Because this bill does nothing. This bill does nothing for Australia's security. All this bill does is say it's going to be okay from now on, for the minister to dip his hand into the public purse, take money that could be going to schools and hospitals, and use it to go to court to stop sick people from getting treatment. That's what the government's asking for. The government is asking for the right to use public money to stop sick people getting treatment.